No, it was a good start. Do I need to go get him?
Oh. I'm sorry, I spent like half an hour trying to get it on there and I just couldn't figure it out. Just wait.
I hear you should keep that forever.
Also, for some reason, your name's not on the program that's on the QR code. It's on program.
Yeah, I hear you should keep that forever. Never revisit it to your children. Stop doing that. It's physically close to the church. They're fighting. I can't have these are my rules. We're all supposed to. And I'm new, so I don't get to see. What's up in
Ready to go?
What took you so long in this? Why were you 30 minutes late? It was long. I saw 7 minutes ago at your house. Okay. And then I got home once.
Okay, good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Most of you know me. I'm Teresa Delaplane. I have the great honor and privilege of teaching the 8 people that you're going to hear today. And we had this idea to do a project based on the Metamorphoses of Ovid. He was a 1st century AD poet, and these stories in his Metamorphoses all involve some Roman gods who go through some kind of transformation or metamorphoses. And there are several composers that have written solo works for oboe on this topic. So I thought it would be a fun thing for us to look at some of those composers, and everyone got to pick which one they wanted to do. And there are 3 composers we're going to look at. The first one is Benjamin Britten. He was a 20th century British composer. And the piece that he wrote is called 6 Metamorphoses after Ovid. And it was also the inspiration probably for the other 2 composers' works that we're going to look at. And so he used Ovid's Metamorphoses and chose 6 pieces to write a solo work about. They're all like 3 to 5 minutes long. The second composer is Michael Dougherty. He's a living composer. He teaches at the University of Michigan. And his piece is called 6 Riffs after Ovid. All of them are kind of jazzy, so they're in a much different style than Britain. And you can see the 6 different movements. They refer to the 6 movements of Britain. The Britain movements are Pan, Phaeton, Niobe, Bacchus, Narcissus, and Arethusa, but each one is dedicated to a different jazz artist. And the third composer is Anne Corse. She's an Australian composer, another living person. She's received a lot of awards in Australia, and her work is called Carmen Perpetuum, 6 Metamorphoses after Ovid, and it's 6 different stories, different from the Britain or the Doherty. She wrote this in 2022, and it was premiered shortly after that. And so you're going to hear some of these stories overlapping. Each student made a PowerPoint presentation, which we'll just be looking at before each student plays. So the first presentation by Ainsley. No, this is not yours. Sorry, this is Carrie's, okay? So this is Niobe, who, lamenting the death of her 14 children, was turned into a mountain. And Niobe was the daughter of Tantalus, the king of Sipylus and son of Zeus. She was the wife of another king. She eventually became queen, and she had 7 sons and daughters. There was a celebration, and at this celebration, Niobe was bragging about how she had so many children. And Apollo and Artemis heard, and they came down to Earth to kill all of her children as a punishment for her pride. And having lost all her family, Niobe ran to Mount Sipylus. She pleaded to the gods to give an end to her pain, and then she was turned into a mountain. And each student wrote about what to listen for in the music, how the music represents the story. There's a lament that opens this piece, and you hear it several times throughout the movement, portraying Niobe's cries. In the middle, you hear Niobe's uncontrollable sobs shown in the music, and the piece ends in a very metered way and reaches to a final high D flat as Niobe's turned into a mountain. Okay, and this is not Ainsley Warford, this is Carrie Brewington. It's also from Benjamin Britten's Ovid. Bacchus was the Roman god of wine and revelry, the son of Jupiter, and the mortal queen Semele, with whom he had an affair, and you're going to hear more about Semele later. And this act made Jupiter's wife Juno furious. First, she tricked Semele into asking to see Jupiter's god form, killing her. Jupiter saved the baby Bacchus by attaching him to his thigh. Bacchus then stayed with his aunt for a short time before ending up in the care of a satyr, a half-man, half-goat. In the music, this is how Bacchus is represented. The entire piece is represented as a festival and scenes from the festival. The first section and the third section portray a drunken Bacchus. The second section represents little boys running around and playing loudly. And the last section is women gossiping and talking. Represented in a much different way in the personification of Jim Morrison. This piece is by Michael Dougherty, and this presentation is by Chloe Tucker. So, as we just heard, Bacchus was the god of wine and revelry. And we know all of this from the last one. And he traveled the world teaching people how to make wine. I didn't know that part. So the festival, the Bacchanalia festival, were a series of celebrations in ancient Rome that honored Bacchus, the god of wine, freedom, and ecstasy. The wild parties were characterized by music, dancing, singing, and extravagant feasts. They originated as secret festivals hosted by women only, who eventually allowed men to join. Due to the reputation of the festivals as orgies, the Roman Senate decreed to prohibit them in 186 BC. And this is represented as Jim Morrison. He was a leader for a band called The Doors. Any of you remember The Doors? He was known for his unpredictable performances and energetic personality. He was erratic, dramatic, and heavily dependent on drugs and alcohol. And he was also a compassionate poet. Spoken poetry, was well loved by many. He was also arrested several times for public intoxication, disturbing the peace, inciting a riot, and public something. That's probably enough. Okay, so the music reflects these. It has a drone and asks the performer to play all the way to the thread of the reed, so putting the reed much further in the mouth than normal, which creates a more raucous kind of sound, sounding like a snake charmer. And it also features wild and out-of-tune vibrato to mirror the wild festivals and the wild behavior of Jim Morrison. And this is performed by Chloe Tucker. This is another work by Michael Dougherty with a jazz flair to it, and Arethusa is represented as the great singer Aretha Franklin. And this presentation is by Lime Whitlow. I have to tell you, Lime's background to his presentation looked much more interesting than what I have here, but somehow I couldn't import it into this longer PowerPoint. So, Arethusa was a follower of Artemis and a skilled hunter. One day, after a long, exhausting hunt, she came across a perfectly still pool, which she decided to bathe in to refresh herself. Unbeknownst to her, the pool was actually Alpheus, the river god. Alpheus was mesmerized by Arethusa's beauty and pursued her, but Arethusa didn't want any suitors, so she ran away. As she fled, she prayed to Artemis for help. Artemis enveloped Arethusa in a cloud to help her elude Alpheus. Her pursuer, however, caught the cloud and kept calling her name. In her fear-stricken panic, Arethusa transformed into a river and fled under the Ionian Sea toward Syracuse. In a final attempt to help Arethusa escape Alpheus's grasp, Artemis tore the land asunder, and Arethusa dove in, transforming finally into a fountain of fresh water. The style of this song is attributed to Aretha Franklin's skilled vocals, which in the beginning of the piece is tied to Arethusa's prowess in hunting. As the piece goes on, it gets more hectic, shrill, and fast-paced, describing Alpheus's chasing the fearful hunter. The song ends dramatically, just like Arethusa's last second escape from Alpheus, as she turns into a fountain of fresh water. And this is performed by Lime Whitlow. Arachne, and this is by Ann Kors. Presentations by Hannah Myers. Arachne's story: she was a skilled weaver who became boastful of her talents. You recognize a theme here? And challenged Athena, the goddess of war, who was known to be a skilled weaver as well, to a contest. Athena warned her of the consequences of provoking and enraging the gods. The beginning of the piece begins loud and confident, as to reflect Arachne's boastful nature and pride for her skilled weaving. As the piece continues, it becomes mysterious and soft, reflecting the concentration of the work while weaving. It also reflects how Arachne's work is irreverent in the eyes of the gods. At the beginning of the next section, the loud and brash oboe part indicates Arachne's continued boastfulness about her skill, and the end section reflects the actions of a spider weaving. During the contest, Athena wove a tapestry that depicted the gods in a positive light, whereas Arachne depicted the gods as drunks and highlighted their mistakes against mankind. At the end of the contest, Athena was outraged by Arachne's depiction of the gods, despite the handiwork of Arachne's tapestry clearly being more skilled. As a consequence, Athena turned Arachne into a spider. And this is performed by Hannah Myers. actor is Semele. This is from Movement 3 of Anne Corse's Carmen Perpetuum. This presentation is by Ainsley Warford. Semele was a beautiful Theban princess and priestess in Zeus's temple. Zeus admired her dedication to himself and appeared before her in the form of a mortal man. She fell for him, and their affair lasted weeks, with Semele finding herself pregnant. Zeus's wife Hera discovered their affair and Semele's pregnancy and decided to sabotage this relationship. She disguised herself as a mortal old woman, hiding her identity. The two women became trusting friends, so Semele opened up to Hera about her affair. Hera convinced Semele that Zeus was lying about his identity. Hera encouraged Semele to ask Zeus to appear in his godly form, confirming his identity. When she did, Zeus's godly form was too overwhelming for Semele's mortal body, which burst into flames. Despite her being killed, Zeus was able to save the unborn baby and sew it into his thigh until it was full term. This baby was Dionysus, also known as Bacchus. And Ainsley identified 6 musical sections that represent the story in the music. The first section is the fun and flirtatious, representing the beginning of the affair, followed by Semele falling in love, her excitement about her pregnancy, building a relationship with Hera, and then her disappointment, and then her mourning over the loss of her baby. And this is performed by Ainsley Warford. Another movement by Ann Corse. This presentation is by Dorian Pierce. Pygmalion was a sculptor who, detesting the faults beyond measure which nature has given to women, chose to remain celibate and dedicate his life to sculpting. He made a sculpture of a woman that he found so perfect that he became infatuated with it. He would kiss the sculpture and bring it various gifts. The first half of this piece represents the act of creating this sculpture, with the short, fast melody representing Pygmalion chiseling away at the stone. During Aphrodite's festival day, Pygmalion made an offering at her altar, wishing for the living likeness of my ivory girl. Aphrodite granted her wish, bringing his statue to life. Pygmalion married the now living sculpture, and they had a child. The second half of this piece, with its beautiful flowing melodies, is a perfect representation of Pygmalion's prayers and joy. And this is performed by Dorian Pierce. And this piece is also a composition by Ann Corse, and the presentation is by Laura Lee Erdman. The story of Daphne involves 4 characters: Apollo, the god of light and poetry, and supposedly the most handsome; Daphne, a beautiful river nymph; Eros or Cupid, the god of love; and Peneus, a river god and Daphne's father. After defeating a mighty enemy, Apollo boasted of his strength and taunted Cupid for his short stature and preoccupation with matters of love rather than war and might. Cupid was offended and proceeded to prove the strength of his powers regarding love. Cupid shot 2 arrows. One kindles love, the other dispels it. The one that kindles it is golden, with a sharp, glistening point. The one that dispels it is blunt, with lead beneath its shaft. With the second, he transfixed Daphne, but with the first, he wounded Apollo, piercing him to the marrow of his bones. Apollo sees Daphne in the forest and is immediately drawn to her, with an unbreakable need to love her. He then proceeds to chase Daphne, proclaiming his undying love and devotion. Daphne, having been struck with the lead-tipped arrow, runs away out of repulsion and fear. As the story goes, Daphne is nearly caught a couple of times, and when it is evident to her that she would not be able to escape Apollo's grasp, she prays to her father, the river god Peneus, to be delivered from this chase. The river god grants her request and proceeds to change her into a laurel tree. While he cannot love Daphne in her human form, the laurel tree becomes Apollo's beloved tree. He swears to adorn his lyre and bow and arrow with laurel boughs and wears her leaves as a crown. In the music, the constant motion of eighth notes is Daphne running and Apollo chasing. The 7/8 time is the stumbling, off-balance, frantic feel of Daphne stumbling through the woods to escape. An anguished and pleading section, including a note from the composer to play brash and ugly, denotes the anguished prayer to Peneus for help. Eighth notes become closer together and louder as tree transformation begins, and then suddenly slows and quiets as the roots become grounded. This is Daphne, performed by Laura Lee Erdman. enjoyed hearing about all these metamorphoses. I'm going to ask everyone who performed to come back up for a group bow. And then we'll take a picture and then we can have cookies.
Cookies.